Hi, my name is Skye Waterson, and I am really excited to have a productive conversation with Mike Vardy.
Skye, thanks so much for taking the time to join me today. I really appreciate you, especially because what time is it for you right now as we're having this conversation?
It's 6, but I start work at 5 days, so you're good time.
Well, it is, one of the things that I really want to make sure that we kind of explore more on the podcast. And we have a variety of, obviously we have over 600 plus episodes, and it really, attention is such a huge part of being productive. And I want to kind of talk about how you got to where you are in terms of your ADHD journey, because you started off kind of, if I remember correctly, it was when you were working on your PhD that you transitioned from academic coach to ADHD coach, right? And then figuring out. So can we talk a little bit about how that process went for you?
Yeah, yeah, it was really interesting, for me, what had happened was in my undergrad, I'd gone through university, I made my CV look good, but to be honest, I'd crashed and burned out a bunch of times. And so when I got to my PhD and I was staring at this big project, multiple years, I thought, okay, I need to figure out if something's going wrong. So I went to my university's learning center and I just said, test me, tell me if there's something. And they did. They were really good, and they came back and they said, "Okay, we definitely think you should go and get tested for ADHD."
Hmm.
And that was a real surprise because I had taught ADHD at the university. I taught it multiple, I taught human development, psychology, but everything I learned was with kids. So
Right.
the idea of adults, especially adults doing PhDs, having ADHD, at the time now it seems silly because it's so common, but like at the time it was very unusual, and I really had to, I didn't have a lot of information. They didn't give me a lot of information. They gave me a lot of strategies for university, but I think it threw me down a research path that led me then to writing my own articles, um, partially for accountability, posting those in ADHD communities. I wanted to see what other people thought of them, and that really started my career. Now I actually work more exclusively with CEOs and
Hmm.
executives who have ADHD. I still have support for people who just want to get productive. But yeah, it kind of started my whole journey.
When you were building kind of your evidence-based ADHD support, this is very similar to some of the stuff that I was talking to Anna Laura about. Anna Laura comes wrote
Mhm.
Tiny Experiments, very much into research. Like you're going down this rabbit hole. Was there any kind of research study that you encountered when you were doing this research that, maybe famously changed or debunked something that you'd been coaching on? And then I see, like you're like, probably a couple, but I'd love to hear.
Yeah.
So maybe something that someone might not have heard, right? Like because when you go deep into
Yeah.
the weeds, there's stuff that you're going to have access to that others just won't surface.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, my favorite paper, and it's something I got very early in my academic sort of in my business career, I guess. I was very lucky because before I started teaching, I really researching. So
Right.
when I was sort of back, the first year of my business, I read a paper called The Neurobiology of ADHD by Tripp and Wickens. Highly,
Hmm.
highly recommend it. Great paper. And they talked about this theory that they actually released another paper on last year about this concept that when we have ADHD, we don't get a lot of dopamine for starting a task.
Okay.
And apparently when you're neurotypical, you do. And so what
Hmm.
that means is we don't get that little boost of like, it's going to be so great because you're going to get something great at the end of it. We just get like, this sucks. And then at the end, we're like, I'm not doing it anymore. Thank goodness, but it still sucked. And that's kind of it. And
Hmm.
that was really validating and really shifted for me a lot of things that really, it was the first time I looked at a paper and thought to myself, okay, this could change everything in terms
Mhm.
of how we look at and teach people how to do things with ADHD. Because at the time, it was just Pomodoro method, which I
Sure. Well,
love,
that's
but,
it.
you know.
No, no, no. And that's the thing is that I find that like when I'm talking to people who have ADHD or are undiagnosed but feel that they might, which is a very tricky thing, which I definitely want to get into, is how do you know? Like, how do you? But what I want to talk about
Mhm.
is like it's often tools, right? Like it's the tools,
Yeah.
it's the list, it's the, and
Mhm.
so the Pomodoro technique would have been one. Are there other like what are some of the tools that you teach now, knowing what you know when you're working with clients, especially like you said, you're working with high achievers that that
Mhm.
may may level up the tools or the let's say the tips or tricks that those that are currently the more popular ones, like the common ones that
Yeah.
you've already
Yeah.
alluded to.
Well, I think I'm pretty unique, maybe because of my background. I don't teach the Pomodoro technique. It wasn't designed for people with ADHD. A lot of those things are kind of what I would consider to be, in the nicest way, because it's been really helpful, but they're very much like tacked on, retrofitted systems for ADHD people. They're not
Mhm.
built from the ground up. So I don't teach like a ton of tips and tricks. I have three systems, six routines that I teach, that help you go and focus yourself, your business, your revenue. That's what I focus on. And they're all designed pretty much from the ground up around ADHD first, ADHD research first. So
Okay.
it's not going like, cool, well, this is like a thing. And then, to the point where I designed something and then it ended up being very similar to the Eisenhower matrix with a few key differences. And
Mhm.
that was just what happened. It wasn't like, oh, how do we alter the Eisenhower matrix?
Right. Right. Um, I want to talk about again the knowing whether you are the ADHD or not. We live in a world, and again, there's a lot of late diagnosed like adult ADHD,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
and when I talked to Jesse Anderson about this, we'll link back to that episode as well. There was a
Mhm.
study, I think it was a Harvard study that kind of is an
Yeah.
assessment. And after I had a conversation with Mike, and I've been tested before, and I'm not there, which I there are moments where I'm surprised. I'm like, okay, well maybe I am ADHD, and then it.
Mhm.
So how does someone really get a sense of whether? Because it could just be that they're overwhelmed. Maybe it could be that there's so many things vying for their attention that feels that
Mhm.
way. What's the
Mhm.
distinction? Because I think a lot of people are looking for, oh, so I'm ADHD. Okay, that's why. But in some instances, that may not be the case.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I will say, I think, like with the people I work with, I would say about 50% are undiagnosed ADHD. So 50% of people have diagnosed ADHD, 50% of people, for whatever reason, have decided not to go down that path, but they still feel like they benefit from alternative, unconventional, if you will,
Mhm.
organizational structures. And so there is more of a discussion now, and it's happening in the research as well around this idea of subclinical. Because when you think about ADHD, what ADHD is, it's basically symptoms that everybody has experienced at some point in their life. But when you have ADHD, those symptoms are persistent and they're pervasive across time, across different categories of your life, when you're a kid, when you're at home, when you're on holiday. And so for people who really say, okay, I don't know if I fit your ADHD diagnostic, but I do feel like I benefit from alternative systems. Like my thing is always like, awesome, that's cool. This is like a free space. In fact, when I worked with the New Zealand government back in the day when they were like still figuring this stuff out, um, a lot of the time I would teach program and people would say, oh, but everyone could benefit from this. And I was like, absolutely. Everybody has
Yeah.
bad days. And if you have a system to work with bad days and good days, there's nothing wrong with that.
Well, and what's interesting is, because I've got lots of people in my community that have read the productivity diet and are using time crafting, and they're finding that,
Hmm.
oh, these
Yeah.
attention paths, they make sense to me because what they find, and this is something that I notice myself, and it's not again not just ADHD folks, but folks that is they get caught up in the details. They get in the weeds because they're looking at the details of the task as opposed to things that can filter their focus and kind of help them
Hmm.
prioritize. And And when Jesse and I were talking about this, the interest driven versus importance or urgency driven thing is a
Mhm, mhm.
huge aspect. What are some of the things that you teach, especially when you're dealing with CEOs? Because CEOs shouldn't
Yeah.
really have to deal with urgent nearly as much as they should be. Like that's an avenue that
Be
I mean, they
surprised.
well, no, but I'm saying they
Yeah,
shouldn't. So what
yeah,
are some of the things you found when you're working with those
yeah.
CEO levels that
Well, I
fit
think
into this kind of mold?
yeah, well, I think when people think CEOs, they think like big business. And I do work, I've got
Sure.
one very prominent client from Google, and she's been wonderful, shouting me out all over the place. But when we're talking about, we could be talking about small businesses, we could talk about people who are getting their first EA, that kind of stuff. The biggest thing is that people get tied up in the fires because a lot of that job, is essentially just dealing with all the problems, all the issues that come up. And so a lot of times people will bring in things and say, this is a fire, this is a fire, this is a fire. And so the first thing that I teach with people, and you guys can go on my Unconventional Organization Instagram if you want and just DM me conversation, and I'll give you the focus formula to help with this. But basically, what you need is the first thing we want to do is we want to go in and say, okay, let's just brain dump everything that's in your head. Because
Hmm.
if you have this kind of brain, you have working memory struggles, there's a ton of stuff that's just floating around in there. And even if you wrote this three things down, you'd still be like, but that's not everything. Because I've done this with
Yeah.
hundreds of people. And so you write it down, you brain dump everything in your head. Don't look at your email, don't look at your extra task list that you threw away 2 days ago, just the head. And then
Mhm.
from there, you wanna go in and say, "Okay, of these things, what are the ones that are truly urgent, as in I have to do them tomorrow, or
Mhm.
there will be a significant external negative consequence?" So
Okay.
forget what people said that was urgent. If you ended up in a position where your whole day went sideways, you weren't gonna get anything done, what would you still be trying to do on your phone? What would you still be, like, messaging people about happening tomorrow? Like, I have a podcast tomorrow, I have to, like, prepare for it, that kind of thing. Everything else is not urgent, and then from there, we're looking at it and going, "Okay, what are the important things?" It's usually like 1 to 3 that we can do this week that would become that 80/20 thing for your business or where you're at in life. So, the thing that's really gonna move the needle for you. 9 times out of 10, it's not the new shiny thing. 9 times out of 10, it's something that's, like, super systems focused. I'm a big systems builder. We actually do done for you systems. We build them for our community, but, you know, those are the things you wanna focus on, and then obviously we talk about the next step, which is cool, now I don't wanna do them, how do we do that,
Well,
Skye? So
to me, part of it is, and I talked to Jesse about this too, but I mean, this is not uncommon, is it's the dopamine part you're talking about. Like, you don't get
yeah,
so as a writer, a great example would be, um, when you're writing a book, you don't get the dopamine the same way you do when you post a blog post or write a
nope,
newsletter or whatever.
nope,
And
yeah,
so when you're talking about the things to prioritize and the thing, it's harder for anybody really to
mhm,
really
mhm,
kind of well, not anybody, but it can be hard for people to say, okay, well, I'm not going to get that dopamine, so I'll do this thing instead. And it's not a conscious choice either. You have to,
yeah,
so your job, what you're doing, and again, everything you were talking about can be used by people who, this is why I love exploring this topic, because as we niche down into ADHD, to your point that you mentioned earlier, some of this stuff it goes well beyond the use of ADHD. So for
mhm,
somebody who's
mhm.
not going to get that dopamine, how do you? Because that's got to be something that you have to consistently work at.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, yeah, exactly. So the first thing that we talk about is, okay, what is truly urgent? What is truly important? The urgent stuff usually comes with its own dopamine. Once you understand that it has to be done today or something bad will happen, that's usually for a lot of people enough to kind of give them the dopamine to do that task.
Right.
But then we have all these tasks in the middle that are not urgent and not important. Those tasks are traps. Do not do them. Don't do them. Don't focus on them. They're not like they need to be done eventually, but they're traps in terms of like they're not going to help you move your business forward. And when you're doing something like business development or being a CEO, it's all about leverage. We have to focus on that leverage.
Mhm.
So, what we want to do then is we want to go ahead and think about the couple of things that are really, really going to move us forward. And I actually have a whole step into focus routine that I teach, but the first step essentially is we put it in the calendar at your very, very best time. Like, when are you the most awake, when you're the most naturally energized, all of those kinds of things. That's when we want to put it. We're not going to say, we'll do it after work. We're really tired, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, unless you're a night owl, in which case it could flip, right? So
Unless that's when you have energy. Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah. So so then from there, what we're going to do is we're going to actually use that neuroscience paper that I mentioned at the beginning. We're going to give ourselves a reward for starting the task. This is really, really crucial because at this point, a lot of people go, and those people don't do as many tasks. That's just the reality. Like
mhm,
not accepting that you might need help with dopamine boosters is one of the things that holds people back. And so what we think about is we go, okay, well, let's think about all five senses. You got touch, taste, sight, smell, sound. What are the things we could add to the beginning of your task when you're sitting down? I heard somebody talking about going for a walk and writing and then being unable to like cross that into being writing at home.
yeah,
That's a transition problem and it's really common with ADHD. So we want to do the reward at your desk or on the floor or wherever it is you're going to be working next, and it needs to be something that's fun. So an example could be, I'm going to grab a coffee, I'm going to read an article, I'm going to listen to some music, I'm going to sit somewhere comfortable. That's great. We're going to do that, something you're not going to get stuck doing forever, obviously.
right, right.
um, and that becomes the first step of going, I'm sitting down with the intention of starting the task. And for a lot of people, that will break the multiple hours, multiple days of procrastination. I just need to motivate myself to get to the thing. I just need to do that. Like we cut that out completely. It gives people a lot of confidence. And then the next thing we support after that is we look at your working memory. Because usually if you don't do a task, it's too boring, it's too confusing, or it's too emotionally vulnerable. Those are the three reasons.
I talk about the idea of productivity zones, which I think is really
Yeah.
like the idea of like, you can't see this right now, but I have a chair in the back corner, and that's my reading, sitting, thinking chair. The chair I'm sitting in
Mhm.
right now,
Mhm.
I'm at my computer. This is
Yep.
where all of this kind of work happens.
Yep.
It's a very
I have a
long, I have a
similar chair.
yeah, I have a
Yeah.
7 foot long desk. So this is one
Yeah.
side. And then if you
Mhm.
go to the other part of the desk, it's where I sit and actually do some handwriting, and I can sit and do my
Yeah.
planning and things like. I
Mhm.
actually have a free write, which I'll link
Mhm.
to the episode that I interviewed Adam Lieb, the founder of the
Mhm.
company. And that device alone is
Mhm.
for writing, and it's not for writing articles or like, so you can get really here's and this is, I'm going to circle back to this. So I got really granular with that machine is only used for book writing. And they're
Mhm.
like,
Mhm.
why would you spend that much money on a machine? And that was my intent, to buy the machine, to go, this is what this is entirely for. But I've
Mhm.
whittled it down because sometimes I find that my best ideas happen sitting in that chair that you can't see right now.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
then I will pull out my phone or pull out my
Mhm.
iPad, or
Mhm.
scroll up here. So each zone kind of, if you use them often enough the way that you've intended, the
Mhm.
work just happens there. So,
Mhm.
but can you get too granular with this? That's another thing I think that I've read about it, where you get too interested to the point where, where'd all the time go? Oh no, I've spent too much time. And then all of a sudden the
Yeah.
productivity guilt shows up because you spent too much
Yeah.
time cultivating the right space. So it's not something that you can go overboard, or
Oh,
like, how
100%.
how
Yeah.
do you navigate that?
Yeah, sometimes I think if I wrote a book, which I'm actually writing a book right now, by the way. But,
There you go.
back in the day before that, I was talking about this idea of, like, the book would be called Don't Clean Your Room. Because it's funny, the business version of that is updating your website. Like, the amount of people who go, "This is
Yep.
really cool. I'm excited to be here, and now I have to update my website." There's always those things, and I think the thing I would say is, like, yeah, we can totally get too granular with this. A lot of times people complain They come to me and they say, like, I'm drowning in tips and tricks. I feel like I have to take a whole degree in this topic. Um, for me, it really comes down to I'm just that person. I'm always like, okay, cool. What does the research say? Like, if
Right.
the research doesn't back up what you're doing, then what you're doing is just something that you're doing. That's cool, and you can totally share it, and it's totally an amazing strategy for other people to use. But that's kind of what it comes down to for me. So the reason I share these strategies is because that's what the research says. I don't have any research about zones, but I do have research about transitions. So if we were to
Let
kind of
let
go in and say,
let's get into
yeah,
that. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So the research about transitions is basically saying once you're doing something, it's nice to do it for a while because with ADHD, we have what's called the bleed effect. And so we find ourselves struggling to shift between different tasks. So one of the benefits, probably based on what we're saying, of having a zone is that it sort of encourages you to really not transition. And so this is why I don't recommend the Pomodoro method unless you're using it for what it's actually designed for, which is studying. Because if you're studying, your whole day is just studying. And so you're not really transitioning at all. But, a lot of people, when you actually talk to them about how they use the Pomodoro method, they'll say, well, I use it at the beginning to get me started. And then I usually turn it off and I don't actually take those 5 minute, 25-minute breaks because it's like really hard to transition between that, especially if the next task was different. That would be very difficult.
And
Um,
typically, it's supposed
yeah.
to be different. Typically, like each of
Yeah.
them, in its purest form,
Yeah.
the Pomodoro technique, every
Yeah.
25 is supposed to be different. And
Yeah.
what's interesting about that, and I want to circle back to what we were talking about too, but is people will, and we see this with my work, with David Allen's work, with the Covey, like with the Eisenhower matrix, which you touched on, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Which became the Covey matrix, which you riffed on.
Yeah.
The idea
Mhm.
of there's the purist that goes, okay, well, this is,
Mhm.
and no, I can't think of a single person that does the Pomodoro in the purest way, because when I
No.
mention it to them that way, they're like, no, that's not right. I'm like, it actually is. Like if you go to the
Yeah.
website and
Yeah.
look at, so it's fascinating. You know what I use the Pomodoro
Yeah.
technique for sometimes, and what if people is tasks I hate.
Yes, and usually that's like the ready, set, go framework, which
Yeah,
again, it's good, but one of the things that we struggle with is like we have a limited amount, and I think this is really important. We have a limited amount of like push in our day, if that makes
yeah.
sense. So
Will.
yeah, we have a limited amount of will. There's research behind this. This is all,
Yep.
we have limited amounts of it. So if we say, I'm going to push here and I'm going to push there and I'm going to push there, then we can end up very exhausted at the end of the day. So my goal with people when I'm working with them, especially CEOs and business owners, because the grind does not, it just keeps going. And then you want to be home and be present for your family, is to have more of a gentle, like, I call them little springs, little spring over the executive
Mm,
functioning resistance. We do little springs over. Um, and that allows you to then go through your day without using all of that push so that you can use it in places where you really need it, like the fire, like the family stuff, and that kind of thing. So we don't want to waste that energy. And so the first thing is dopamine. The second thing I recommend people do is, now that you've kind of gotten a little dopamine boost, you're feeling good, you've let yourself take a break before you start, which is, one of those mindset things. um the next thing to do is to go, okay, well, let me turn off any distractions, emails, etc. I'm feeling good. We're still listening to stuff. We're still doing that. And then from there, you might switch down to just music and go ahead and just write on a small piece of paper. What are all the steps of the task that you're going to do during this work period? Write it down like a recipe for somebody who's going to forget. That person is you. You have working memory struggles and you'll get lost. So, write down what you're planning to do. Sometimes people use this more, sometimes people use this less, depending on the task. But most of the time, if somebody comes to me and they say, "Hey, I did it, it's not working," I say, "Well, did you write down what you were gonna do?" And they go, "No, I thought I should just figure it out." And I'm like, "Ah, there it is."
yeah. And again, it's not, I mean, one of the first thing you mentioned, brain dump. One of the things I always
Mhm.
say to people is make a
Yeah.
project as small as it can be. And a lot of people, that's
Mhm.
why talking to David Allen years ago, he says, I hate the term
Mhm.
subtasks. I don't know if his stance has changed on as much, but he goes, a
Mhm.
task is a single action. So anything that's
Mhm.
more than one step is a project, which throws people
Mhm.
off. But it's true.
Mhm.
Grocery shopping is a project. Like it now
Yeah.
again, there's nuance, right? So if, I think another thing, and Jesse brought this up, and again, this is not unique to ADHD, is verbs. Like verbs are helpful when you're writing down tasks, like
Mhm.
starting it off
Mhm.
with
Oh,
the
yeah.
brain needs that break, right? Because it needs to know,
Mhm.
and it can help a group different like
Mhm.
actions up, right?
Oh, yeah. Chunking is really helpful because of that transition struggle, like we said.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Before we wrap up, one of the things that because I mean, you are a researcher and you've dedicated your time and energy and attention and concentration to this. If you could launch one big research initiative in the ADHD space tomorrow, what would it be and why?
Oh, I love this. I want to do that so badly. I'm putting that out into the universe. That is my long-term vision. You've got me. So in terms of research initiatives, gosh, there are so many. I think right now there is a real dearth of what it's like to be the boss, be the leader with ADHD. Like that is the one area. Sometimes I will have a struggle to back everything up by research because there is no research. And one of
Mm.
the areas where that is the case is if you look into how to be a leader and how to lead people, and also how to do that when your brain is a little bit different and their brain is not, or it is as well. There isn't really any research on that. It's all about how to support, employees and things, assuming that you are, of course, neurotypical. So, which is often surprisingly not the case. And
Yeah.
so I would love to do some really deep diving research into practically, okay, let's get your strategies together, let's get you sorted, but then let's get you promoted. Let's get you running your own thing. Let's get you doing whatever your dreams are. And how do we do that? And how do we show up as a leader in a neurodiverse friendly way rather than trying to put ourselves in those boxes that just, don't feel right, whether you've got ADHD or whether you think you do or whether you just, resonate with these struggles.
Seems to me the time is right for this sort of thing because, number one, more and more people are ADHD being diagnosed or are
Hmm.
thinking that they should at least get looked at. But
Yeah.
also there is the willingness to look into it if you're in that leadership role is
Hmm.
grown. And
Yeah.
I would imagine that some of the shame and that can be associated because I'm sure that there is that, like, the vulnerability
Mhm. Oh, yeah.
aspect because
Mhm.
leadership and vulnerability are being talked about quite a bit. So you've
Mhm.
almost got this perfect storm where it would be a
Mhm.
good time to explore it too.
Yeah. Yeah, no, 100%. I think it's so important because, one of the things people often ask me is about disclosure. That was a question I used to get a lot when I was working with the government or organizations. And one of the biggest things that people would miss a lot is I would say, okay, it's cool that disclosure is set up and we're going to be really supportive of everybody, but what about when that person wants to get a promotion? What about when they wanna get a raise? Like, is the person who decides that, whether to put them in a team leadership role, whether to give them more responsibility, is that person going to know that they have ADHD, and are they gonna take that into account? And I think there's less and less conversation about, because so much of it's about struggling, which is obviously true, but, once you move through that, you're in a position where you're going, "Okay, well, how do I leverage my strengths and how do I keep going?" Basically.
So I was going to wrap up here in a second, but I want to go down a bit of a rabbit hole if that's okay with you. We've got a bit more time.
It's okay, it's
Um,
what we do.
so we hear about diversity a lot, right? And there's
Mhm,
promotional around diversity, and I think that that's incredibly
mhm.
important. I wonder if, and again, this is see when you've been in a space long enough. You've been studying this for how long? How long have you been studying this? Guy? Like how long have you
I've
been
been
studying?
studying this I've been running this business for 5 years now, so
Okay, and
that's
then prior to that,
none.
you were studying it as
Prior
well.
to that, I was sort of running around being like, "What's going on?" and trying to figure it
Yeah.
out for myself.
So when you've been spending like I've been 15 years in the productivity space, and when you're in a space for long enough, you start to think about things in a philosophical way as well. And
Mhm,
so I wonder if, because you mentioned neurotypical, neurodiverse, are we getting closer to the point where there's this just understanding that diversity is we're all diverse? Like when are we gonna? Because to me, because one of the things about promotability, which you talked about, is people who are thinking, well, I'm neurotypical. So
mhm,
let's go with this
mhm,
narrative. Um, okay, this person who has ADHD and they know it and they're doing great work, but they have
Mhm.
ADHD. So should they, like, what if we put them in this role? Like, are they going to be, so there's the stigmas that can be associated with it are lower now. But to me, it almost feels like, and again, uh, is the idea of working, like, operating subjectively in an objective company, whether it's big, small, government, what have you. Are we, like, how close do you think, especially with, I mean, I saw research, and again, it was a very cursory glance, so I don't know how deep it was. Like, how many more people are now know they're ADHD? How many people now know that they are struggling with other, neurodivergent? And when I say struggling, it means that the support systems generally haven't supported them, and so the struggle is
Mhm.
real. There's challenges there.
Mhm.
Are we getting closer to the point where it's like, okay, when you come in and work in a place, it's like, okay, so, oh, you have ADHD. Okay, well, here's some support, and here's how we can help you. Oh, you're this. This is how. Like, we got to be getting there, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's a big, big question. I
Yeah.
hear it from all sides. I hear from like organizations where people are getting supported. I hear from organizations where the business owner is very openly like, I have ADHD and this is how I work, and that kind of thing. So it does it there's still a very much a spectrum, 100% of support. Um, I think really it's down to this understanding of, yeah, people work differently.
Hmm.
And one of the interesting things about saying to somebody, "Well, I have ADHD," it's what I always say. People say, "Do I disclose that I have ADHD?" Is, well, the person that you're speaking to might not know what that is, or they might have a concept of what that is that's very old. So
Hmm.
if one of the best things you can do is understand how you work, which is also a journey. Sometimes people come to me because they said, I have ADHD to their boss. And then their boss was like, cool, how do we help you? And they go, I don't know. And then they come to me. So that can happen a lot. So
Yeah.
understanding how you work and then bringing that to your workplace or to your business and saying, hey guys, look, I work best like this. I need these timelines, I need sub deadlines, I need to be able to work from a coffee shop, like some days if I'm doing deep work, whatever it is. And you don't have to include the diagnostic part if you don't want to. That's fully your choice. But I think there is more of an understanding of, we should understand how we work best, and we should be able to, and like I said, I'm not going to speak for every workplace. Workplaces are so different. But,
Yeah.
ideally, there's a world where you can say, this is how I work best. I want to help you reach your goal, or I want to reach this goal in my business. And then people will want you to reach that goal. Like, we're all trying to get somewhere. So in
Mhm.
that way, that's kind of how I often talk about diversity.
All right. So
Yeah.
tell me if I'm right or wrong about this. So
Mhm.
you've got a job that requires you to be at work by a certain time. So you have
Mhm.
an alarm that you set that says,
Mhm.
and on your phone you could do that where it's like, it doesn't just say alarm. You would type in, hey, you need to get ready to go to work. And that would be what would
Mhm.
go off. And you don't set a lot of alarms, because if you set too many, then it's the old, and I've used this adage before, the syndrome, the villain from Incredibles. If everyone's super,
Mhm.
no one is. So it's the same thing. If you have too many alarms or too many weight ringtones, then it doesn't serve you, because we can only, like
Yeah.
you said, working memory. So
100%. Yeah.
that would be, would that be a way to kind of, so to me, I think it needs to work both ways, in that if you go to, if you have ADHD and you go to your organization, and you're willing to say, hey, yeah, you're willing to disclose, and they're supportive, it's got to work on both sides. And I think that we're still trying to figure that out. Like, yes, the
Yeah,
workspace is
yeah.
not generally, they're the ones that have to make the biggest leap. But I
Mhm.
also have concerns that we could go too far in the other direction where it's like, okay, the workplace must accommodate, and then the other person like, well, sorry
Yeah.
I'm late, but I'm time blind. All right, well, I
Yeah.
guess I'm not going to mark you down.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a whole thing. I mean, I work with people who are time blind all the time, and usually what I
Hmm.
tell them, what we discuss, 1, we do talk about natural timers. We don't have time to go into that today, but we talk
Sure.
about natural timers and alarms and
Hmm.
externalizing time and a whole bunch of things like that. Um, but, usually what I tell them is, "Look, you're never gonna be on time. You're either gonna be a little bit early or a little bit late. Like, those are the 2 things you're gonna do.
Yeah.
Like, it's very hard for you to be on time. Trying to be on time all the time is exhausting. So to be a little bit early and do something fun with that time, like hang out in your car, hang out outside, get a coffee, do something fun, and like that is like don't. And obviously you can still, if you talk to Jesse, I think he's used this example, like you can still get a coffee and be late because you've forgotten. Da, da, da. Like it's still hard, but at least try and like not be driving to work at that point or
Yeah.
getting to work. So usually we work around that kind of stuff, and again, a lot of what I do is how do we make it fun? How do we make it useful time? How do we get what we need to do and do what we need to do, but do it in a way that works for us?
Sky, this has been a great conversation. Like you said, we could go deeper into so many other things, but I want to be respectful of your time and the listeners' time. Where can people keep up with the work that you're doing and connect with you?
Yeah, so you can find me at Unconventional Organization. You can also listen to my podcast where I dive into more of the research, the ADHD Skills Lab. And if you want to get my 2-minute focus formula to help you kind of get started on this, you can just message me conversation at Unconventional Organization on Instagram, and I will send it to you.
Sky, thanks so much for having a productive conversation with me today.
Oh, it was great. Thank you for having me.